imagination of the public. As the administrator said in her remarks, it's not the people in this room that need to be convinced. So we need to think about how we're going to bring other people along. The President's Climate Action Plan can be interpreted and ultimately cultivated as part of a different path forward. So a disclaimer, I'm routinely ridiculed by all sides for many things, but one thing is always my rose-colored glasses. I do have them in contact form today, so be forewarned. So framing. How we frame a discussion about climate change, how we frame a discussion about energy, about oil and gas development, it matters. It informs the questions we ask. It tells us about the assumptions we take for granted, and ultimately it influences the policy results. Historic approaches to climate change are not working because of framing, and we'll come back to that. So let's talk about our energy reality. We're on a planet of 7 billion people, growing to 10 billion. That growth, 90% is happening in the developing world. Today in the developing world, 1.4 billion people do not have access to energy. Energy is the cornerstone of raising people out of poverty and improving quality of life. The metrics that you usually think of, improving mortality, reducing fertility, increasing education, these things are only made possible by access to energy. So energy consumption in the world is going to double by 2050. 90% of that energy consumption is going to happen in the developing world. And who are we to say that it shouldn't? So let's go back to our framing. Currently, when we talk about climate change, we talk about a world that's rapidly getting hotter thanks to growing population and increasing economic development. We talk about things being good or bad. We must get off fossil fuels and move to clean energy. Oil sands are bad. Keystone Pipeline's bad. Fracking is bad.
Yes.
Wind is good. Solar is good. Right? Yeah, that's the way we talk about it. Excellent. You know you're playing right into my hands, right? So I'm going to pick on China for a moment. China is rapidly buying up the world's energy resources. They already own 10% of the oil sands. In 5 years, they will replace the United States as the largest importer of oil. By 2030, China and India will consume 90% of all the world's coal. Currently today, 84% of all the world's energy is fossil fuel. By 2030, it's projected to be 80%. So our framing of this climate discussion is myopic. It's happening in an echo chamber. We need to create a vision that doesn't leave out so many people. It's uninteresting to the masses in this country whose number one interest has been for decades and remains to be economic development, in particular their access to a job. And the way that we discuss climate change is polarizing. It's polarizing on epic proportions. So we need a new frame. We need one that's pro-humanity, pro-innovation, pro-energy, and can allow us to mobilize towards a common vision. And to do that, I would suggest that together we need to do 3 things. And these are going to be hard. The first thing we need to do is we need to drop our religious-like preferences for certain types of energy. So our favorite energy villain, oil. We are so ridiculously interdependent on oil that it's absurd. It's how we transport ourselves. It's how we transport all our commerce. Nearly everything you're sitting on, wearing, leaning on, or texting on at this moment comes from an oil byproduct. And when we talk about climate resilience and climate adaptation, those things are going to require oil to get them done. Let's talk about our favorite energy hero, wind. Wind requires manufacturing, it requires mining, it requires transportation, operation and maintenance, and transmission lines. Those things all require oil and gas resources to happen. It's not free. There's no energy source that's a free lunch. And this energy bias that we're bringing to the conversation is limiting our ability to see solutions. The second thing, we must evolve beyond the fracking debate. There are very real concerns about oil and gas development, but they must be viewed within the context of our energy use. Anything else is hypocritical. If you're using energy, which we all are, then we must be part of a responsible conversation about where that energy should be produced. We can start with the concept of I use energy, I care about my community, and I want to have a responsible discussion about how this should happen. Otherwise, the conversation we're having is who else should produce my energy in a way that I just can't see it. And the last thing that we need to do is we need to make a tent big enough for real solutions to emerge. There are extraordinary efficiencies, technology advancements, climate benefits coming out of the oil and gas industry. The tent for climate change needs to be big enough to include the people that need to rise out of poverty through access to energy, and the people that are doing innovation and providing over 85% of today's actual energy sources. The President's climate change plan fundamentally acknowledges, and the Administrator discussed, that we can focus on innovation, increase our economic security, and produce energy together. This is simply a different way of framing the conversation. This can and it will work. In fact, it already is. The President's climate plan acknowledges that CO2 emissions have dropped to 1992 levels, largely thanks to the conversion of coal-fired electricity generation to natural gas. Oil and gas operators in Colorado invested over $40 million in one basin to reduce ozone precursors. When you reduce ozone precursors, you also reduce methane emissions. This work was so successful, it was part of the foundation for EPA's NSPS Quad O rule, which looks at oil and gas emissions. Colorado was such a key part that I was able to go to Washington and testify in support of EPA's NSPS rule. Technology innovation is our friend. Ultimately, in Colorado right now, we are able to produce more oil and gas resource with a smaller footprint, fewer rigs, and less wellheads. Technology innovation across the spectrum is important. It's happening today in oil and gas. And we know economics are a great motivator for communities. It's something that we can rally around. So I think we have to acknowledge that most of us have some reason to stay invested in the status quo. Maybe it's your company business plan, maybe it's your campaign platform you were elected on, maybe it's your personal identity, maybe it's your organization's fundraising paradigm. But as the Administrator said, lives, economies, and communities are at stake. Are you willing to give up your personal self-interest to create a bigger tent that we can solve these problems with? If you care about climate change, or you care about the 7 billion people growing on the planet, then the thinking that got us to this point is not what's going to take us forward. Oil and gas industry is already partners in addressing climate change. We are part of the solution. We'd like to work with you to continue to be that. And I'll conclude with this. Last night I had the honor to be at a talk by a greenhouse scholar. This is a 20-year-old who was born in Pakistan, is now here studying Latin classics. And he gave this quote in Latin, but I'll give it to you in English, even though it would be more impressive in Latin. There is no easy way from the earth to the stars. We best get to work. Thank you.